My name is Eleanor Whitaker, and I am 82 years old now. When you live this long, memories do not fade the way people think they do. Some of them soften, yes, like old cloth worn thin from time. But others remain sharp, bright, and painful, like glass hidden under sand. This story I am about to tell you is not easy for me. Even now, my hands tremble when I think about it. I was there. I saw things happen that never should have happened. I watched a boy, a gentle, hopeful boy, get broken by a world that refused to see his heart. His name was Marcus. I lived across the street from him and his mother in a small brick house with peeling white paint on the porch. I had known Marcus since he was just a little boy with oversized sneakers and laughter that filled the street like music. Marcus was black, and in our neighborhood, that mattered more than it should have. But to me he was simply Marcus, polite, kind, always helping others. Every Sunday, he carried groceries for his mother, and sometimes helped me water my garden when my knees hurt too much to bend. "Miss Eleanor," he would say smiling, "you got the prettiest roses on this street." And I would laugh. "Only because you helped me keep them alive, child." His mother, Denise, was everything to him. I could see it in the way he spoke about her, the way his eyes softened when he mentioned her name. She worked long hours at the hospital as a cleaner, coming home tired but still finding the strength to cook dinner and ask Marcus about school. They didn't have much, but they had love. Real love, the kind people write poems about. Marcus was 16 when everything began to change. It was early autumn, the kind of day when the air smells like dry leaves and distant rain. I remember sitting on my porch, wrapped in my old gray shawl, watching children walk home from school. That's when I noticed Marcus. He wasn't walking alone that day. Beside him was a girl, small, with light brown hair tied into a ponytail. She carried her backpack tightly against her chest, like she was nervous about something. I later learned her name was Emily. They stopped near the corner, just across from my yard. I didn't mean to listen, but old ears catch more than people realize. Marcus shifted his weight from one foot to the other. I wanted to tell you something," he said softly. Emily looked at him, confused. "What is it?" Marcus swallowed hard. Even from where I sat, I could see how nervous he was. His fingers trembled slightly, gripping the strap of his backpack. "I like you," he said. "Not just like a friend. I mean, I really like you." There was silence, the kind that stretches longer than it should. Emily's face changed. Not anger, not exactly, more like fear mixed with something I didn't understand at the time. Before she could answer, voices interrupted them. "Hey, look at this." 3 boys approached from behind. Taller, louder, with the careless confidence of those who believe the world belongs to them. I recognized them. They went to the same school as Marcus. I had seen them before, laughing too loudly, pushing smaller kids around. One of them smirked. "You serious right now?" he said, looking Marcus up and down. "You think she'd like you?" Marcus stiffened. "I wasn't talking to you," he said quietly. The boy laughed, loud, cruel laughter that made my stomach tighten. "Yeah, but we heard you." Another boy stepped closer. "You don't belong with her," he said, voice sharp. "You should know that." Emily stepped back, her face pale. She didn't defend Marcus. She didn't say anything at all. And that silence hurt more than words. The boys began to circle him. "Go back to where you belong," one muttered. I stood up from my chair, my heart pounding. "Leave that boy alone," I shouted from my porch. My voice carried across the street, thin but sharp. They glanced at me, annoyed but not afraid. Marcus looked toward me, relief flickering across his face, but it didn't last long. One of the boys shoved him. Not hard enough to knock him down, but hard enough to humiliate him. Marcus didn't fight back. He just stood there, shoulders tense, jaw tight. Emily turned and ran. Just like that. Ran. The boys laughed again before finally walking away, still throwing cruel words over their shoulders. I crossed the street as fast as my old legs would allow. "Marcus," I called gently. He didn't answer at first. He stared at the ground, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Are you all right, child?" I asked. He nodded, but I knew he wasn't. "I'm okay, Miss Eleanor," he whispered. But his voice cracked. That was the first time I saw something break inside him. Not bones. Not skin. Something deeper. Something invisible. And that was only the beginning. Because later that night, things would get worse. Much worse. I remember the sky turning dark earlier than usual, clouds rolling in like a warning no one listened to. I sat by my window with a cup of tea, watching the street grow quiet. Marcus hadn't come outside again. Neither had his mother. Around 9 o'clock, I heard shouting down the road. Loud voices. Angry voices. At first, I thought it was just teenagers being loud, but then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A cry. Painful. Sharp. Human. I stood from my chair and walked to the door, my heart pounding against my ribs. Outside in the distance, I saw shadows moving. A group. And one figure on the ground. Even now, after all these years, I wish I had moved faster. That I had called for help sooner. That I had done something different. Because that night, Marcus didn't just lose his dignity. He lost something far more important. And I, an old woman watching from the darkness, became a witness to a tragedy that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I still remember the sound of that cry. It cut through the night like shattered glass, sharp, desperate, and full of pain. Even now, when storms roll through my neighborhood and thunder rattles the windows, I sometimes think I hear that same sound again. I stepped off my porch, my slippers scraping against the cold concrete. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Marcus! I called out, though I wasn't sure it was him. The street was dim, lit only by a flickering street lamp that buzzed like an angry insect. Shadows stretched across the pavement, moving in ways that made everything feel wrong, dangerous. As I walked closer, I saw them. 4 boys. Standing over someone on the ground. My stomach twisted before my mind even understood what my eyes were seeing. Marcus. He was curled on the pavement, arms wrapped around his head, trying to protect himself. One of the boys kicked him again, hard, while another laughed. Stop. I shouted, my voice cracking. Leave him alone. They turned toward me, startled. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. What you looking at, old lady? One of them sneered. My hands trembled, but I didn't step back. I said stop. I repeated. I wish I could tell you that they felt shame. That they apologized. That they helped him up. But they didn't. Instead, one of them spat near Marcus and muttered something cruel I will never repeat. Then, like cowards always do, they ran, disappearing into the darkness, leaving Marcus alone on the cold street. I rushed to him, dropping to my knees despite the pain in my joints. Marcus. Marcus, can you hear me? I whispered. He didn't answer right away. Blood ran from his lip, and his breathing was uneven, short, shaky breaths that sounded like they hurt to take. His face. I will never forget his face. Bruised. Swollen. Frightened. But worse than all that, empty. He slowly lowered his arms and looked at me. Miss Eleanor, he whispered. His voice was so weak, so broken, it nearly shattered my heart. Oh, child, I said softly, touching his shoulder. We need to get you home. He tried to sit up, wincing sharply. I'm okay, he muttered. But he wasn't. Not even close. With effort, I helped him stand. He leaned heavily against me, his weight pressing into my frail body. I wasn't strong, not anymore, but I refused to let him fall. Step by step, we walked toward his house. Every movement made him flinch. Every breath sounded painful. The front porch light of his home was on, casting a warm glow that should have felt comforting. But that night, it only made everything feel more fragile. When we reached the door, he fumbled with his keys, his fingers trembling uncontrollably. Let me, I said gently. I unlocked the door and guided him inside. The house smelled like detergent and cooked rice, familiar, comforting scents that reminded me of Denise. But the house was quiet. Too quiet. Mom. Marcus called weakly. No answer. He frowned slightly, confused. She should be home, he murmured. I helped him sit down on the couch. You stay here, I said. I'll get you some water. My hands shook as I filled a glass in the kitchen. I could feel fear crawling up my spine, a feeling I didn't understand yet. When I returned, Marcus had leaned his head back against the couch, eyes half closed. Just as I handed him the glass, the phone rang. That sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. Marcus looked at it, hesitant. Do you want me to answer? I asked. He shook his head slowly. I got it, he whispered. He reached for the phone with trembling fingers and pressed it to his ear. Hello. There was silence on our end, but I could see his face change. Confusion first. Then fear. Then something far worse. No, he whispered. His hand tightened around the phone. No, that's not possible. I felt cold all over. What, he said, voice breaking. What do you mean, she didn't make it? The glass slipped from my hand and shattered against the floor. I didn't even notice. Marcus's breathing became fast, uneven, panicked. You're wrong, he said desperately. You have to be wrong. She was fine this morning. Silence again. Then the words that ended everything. When, he whispered. Another pause. His knees gave out, and he slid down from the couch onto the floor. She was all I had, he whispered hoarsely. The phone fell from his hand, swinging from the cord. I rushed to him, kneeling beside him once again. What happened? I asked gently. But he didn't answer. He just stared at nothing. Empty. Broken. After several long seconds, he finally spoke. They said she collapsed at work, he whispered. Heart attack. His voice cracked in a way that made my chest ache. They tried to save her, but she was gone before they got her to surgery. Gone. Such a small word. Such a terrible meaning. Marcus buried his face in his hands. She promised she'd come home early today, he murmured. She said we'd eat dinner together. Tears slipped through his fingers. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him as tightly as my frail body allowed. He didn't fight it. He didn't move. He just cried. And I cried with him. Because in that moment, I realized something terrible. That boy had been beaten in the street, humiliated in front of others. And now, in the very same night, he had lost the only person who loved him unconditionally. No one should have to carry that much pain in a single lifetime, let alone in a single night. Hours passed like shadows crawling across the walls. Marcus didn't speak much after that. He sat on the floor, staring ahead, as if waiting for his mother to walk through the door. But she never did. And something inside him, something fragile and beautiful, began to fade. The next morning, I watched from my window as Marcus left the house. He walked slowly, too slowly. Bruises marked his face, dark reminders of the cruelty he had faced. But what frightened me most wasn't the bruises. It was his eyes. Empty. Hopeless. Like someone who had already begun to disappear. He was heading to school. And I remember thinking deep in my heart, something terrible is still coming. Because grief alone is heavy. But grief, mixed with loneliness, humiliation, and cruelty, that becomes something far more dangerous. And that day at school would push Marcus closer to a darkness none of us were ready to face. The morning Marcus walked to school after losing his mother, I knew something inside him had changed forever. I stood by my window, my hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea that had already gone cold. I watched him walk down the sidewalk, shoulders slumped, steps slow and heavy. He looked smaller somehow. Not in body, but in spirit. Children passed him on their way to school, laughing, talking, living their normal lives. But Marcus walked alone, as if there was an invisible wall separating him from everyone else. I wanted to call out to him. I wanted to tell him to stay home, to rest, to grieve. But I didn't. And that is a regret I will carry with me until my last breath. The hours passed slowly that day. Too slowly. I tried to distract myself with small things, watering my plants, folding laundry, cleaning the kitchen. But nothing quieted the unease in my chest. Something felt wrong. Deeply wrong. Around mid-afternoon, I saw Marcus returning from school. I hurried to the window again. He walked even slower than before. And this time, people were looking at him. Some students whispered to each other as they passed him. Others stared openly at the bruises still visible on his face. A few laughed. Not loudly, but enough. Enough to wound. I watched one group of boys glance at him and whisper something. Marcus lowered his head, avoiding their eyes. No one walked beside him. No one comforted him. No one said, "I'm sorry about your mother." Loneliness followed him like a shadow. When he reached his house, he didn't look around. He didn't wave. He didn't notice me standing there, watching from across the street. He simply opened the door and disappeared inside. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Such a small sound. Yet somehow, it felt final. The sun began to set not long after. The sky turned shades of orange and purple, the kind of sunset that usually filled me with peace. But that evening, it only made me feel uneasy. Time passed. 30 minutes. Then an hour. No lights turned on inside Marcus's house. That worried me. Denise always turned the lights on early. She hated dark rooms. And Marcus, even as a child, never liked sitting in darkness. I stood from my chair and stepped outside, my heart pounding once again. Marcus. I called softly. No answer. The house remained silent. Too silent. I walked across the street slowly, my breath shallow. When I reached the front porch, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. The door wasn't fully closed. It was slightly open, just enough to leave a thin line of darkness visible inside. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. Marcus. I called again. Still no answer. The house felt colder than it should have. Empty. Still. I stepped inside. The living room was dim, lit only by fading sunlight coming through the window. Shadows stretched across the walls like long fingers. And then, I saw something on the floor. A piece of paper, folded neatly. My hands shook as I picked it up. I didn't want to read it, but I did. The words were written in shaky handwriting, Marcus's handwriting. I'm sorry, it began. Just those 2 words were enough to make my heart race. I tried to be strong, the letter continued. But everything hurts too much. My vision blurred with tears. I lost my mom. People hate me. I feel alone everywhere I go. My breath caught in my throat. I don't want to feel this pain anymore. I just want peace. The paper trembled violently in my hands. And then, I noticed the silence again. Heavy. Unnatural. A terrible feeling crept up my spine. The kind of feeling you get when you already know the truth, but don't want to accept it. Marcus. I whispered. No answer. I walked further into the house. Step by step. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might burst from my chest. And then, I saw him. I will never describe the details. Some things should not be spoken aloud. But I will tell you this. Marcus was gone. Gone in a way that no one could fix. Gone in a way that left the world colder. The letter slipped from my hands. A sound escaped my mouth. Not quite a scream, not quite a cry, something broken in between. Neighbors came running when they heard me. Sirens followed soon after. Red and blue lights flashed across the street, painting everything in harsh colors that made the night feel unreal. Police officers entered the house. Paramedics followed. But it was too late. Far too late. The next day, the school held an assembly. I went, even though my legs ached and my heart felt too heavy to carry. The gymnasium was full of students, hundreds of them, sitting in silence. Teachers stood along the walls, their faces pale. The principal stepped forward to speak. His voice trembled. Yesterday, we lost one of our students, he said. A murmur spread across the room. Some students lowered their heads. Others looked confused. Then he said Marcus's name. And something changed in the room. The whisper stopped. Silence fell like a heavy blanket. I watched as tears began to appear in the eyes of students who had once ignored him. Some cried quietly. Others openly. Even those who had laughed before now sat frozen. Guilt written across their faces. But tears. Tears cannot undo cruelty. They cannot rewind time. They cannot bring back a life once lost. A girl stood up suddenly. Emily. The same girl Marcus had confessed his feelings to days earlier. Her hands trembled. I should have said something, she whispered. Her voice cracked. I should have helped him. Tears streamed down her face. And in that moment, I saw something I will never forget. Regret. Deep, crushing regret. But regret comes too late when silence lasts too long. Years have passed since that day. Many years. The roses in my garden still bloom every spring. But every time I water them, I think of Marcus, the boy who once told me they were the prettiest on the street. His house still stands across from mine. Different people live there now. Different laughter echoes from its windows. But sometimes late at night, when the wind is quiet and the world feels still, I sit on my porch and remember. I remember his smile, his kindness, his gentle voice calling out, "Miss Eleanor, you got the prettiest roses on this street." And I think about how the world failed him, how silence became a weapon, how cruelty became heavier than hope. If there is one thing I have learned in my 82 years, it is this. Kindness is not small. Words are not harmless. Silence is not neutral. Every smile matters. Every voice matters. Every life matters. And somewhere, in a world that moves too fast to notice broken hearts, I hope Marcus has finally found the peace he was searching for.